The gunshot pierced the twilight air of Gonzales, Texas, as Rebecca Reynolds ducked behind the bar of the Silver Dollar Saloon, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was May 1875, and what had begun as a simple dispute over a card game had erupted into a full-blown shootout. Now, as the scent of gunpowder mingled with whiskey and sawdust, she watched in horror as a lantern crashed to the floor, igniting spilled liquor into a rapidly spreading blaze. "Everybody out!" shouted the bartender, abandoning his post and rushing for the door along with the remaining patrons. Rebecca moved to follow, but a burning beam collapsed before her, blocking her path to the front entrance. Flames licked up the walls of the saloon with alarming speed, and smoke began to fill the room, stinging her eyes and making her cough violently. She retreated toward the back storeroom, hoping to find another exit, but found only locked doors and barred windows. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the crackling roar of the fire. Outside, the commotion had drawn a crowd. Among them was Jackson Vance, who had just ridden into town after a long cattle drive from San Antonio. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy had dismounted his horse at the sound of gunfire, and now stood watching as flames engulfed the wooden building. "Is everyone out?" he asked a bystander, his eyes scanning the growing crowd. "The piano player's daughter is still inside," someone shouted. "Rebecca!" Jackson didn't hesitate. He yanked his bandana up over his nose and mouth and sprinted toward the burning structure. "You're crazy, mister," a man called after him. "The whole place is going to come down." But Jackson was already shouldering his way through the batwing doors, which were now framed by hungry flames. The heat hit him like a physical blow, and the smoke immediately began to burn his lungs. He dropped to his knees where the air was slightly clearer and began to crawl forward. "Hello," he called out, his voice muffled by the bandana. "Anyone in here?" Rebecca had taken refuge behind an overturned table, using her skirts to fan away the thickening smoke. She was beginning to feel lightheaded, and the edges of her vision were growing dark. When she heard a voice calling out, she wasn't sure if it was real or if her oxygen-deprived mind was playing tricks on her. "Over here," she managed to cry out between coughs. "By the bar." Jackson followed the sound of her voice, navigating around fallen debris and patches of fire. The heat was becoming unbearable, sweat pouring down his face and soaking through his shirt. He spotted her just as another section of the ceiling gave way, sending a shower of sparks and burning wood all around them. "I'm coming," he shouted, surging forward as Rebecca screamed and covered her head with her arms. He reached her side and grabbed her arm, pulling her close to him. "We need to get out now," he said urgently. "Can you walk?" Rebecca nodded, though her legs felt weak beneath her. "The front door's blocked," she gasped. "We'll find another way," Jackson assured her, though he wasn't certain there was one. "Stay low and follow me." Together they crawled toward the back of the saloon, the fire closing in around them. Jackson's eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape route. Finally, he spotted a window partially obscured by smoke. It was small and high off the ground, but it might be their only chance. "There," he pointed. "We can break through that window." They reached the wall, and Jackson grabbed a nearby chair, smashing it against the glass. The window shattered and fresh air rushed in, momentarily clearing some of the smoke. He quickly knocked away the remaining shards. "I'll boost you up," he told Rebecca, interlacing his fingers to form a step for her foot. Rebecca placed her boot in his hands, and with a surge of strength born of desperation, Jackson lifted her toward the window. She grabbed the sill, pulling herself through the narrow opening with a grunt of effort. Once outside, she turned back, reaching her arms through. "Your turn," she called. Jackson jumped, catching the windowsill, but a sudden groan from above made him look up. The roof was collapsing. With a final burst of strength, he pulled himself through the window just as the interior of the saloon was engulfed in flames behind him. They fell together onto the dirt behind the saloon, coughing and gasping for air. Jackson rolled onto his back, his lungs burning as he gulped in the clean night air. Beside him, Rebecca lay trembling, soot covering her face and dress. "Thank you," she whispered between ragged breaths. "You saved my life." Jackson turned his head to look at her, noticing for the first time the deep blue of her eyes, visible even through the dirt and smoke that smudged her face. "Couldn't leave you in there," he said simply. Around the corner of the building came shouts and the sounds of men organizing a bucket brigade, but it was already clear the saloon was beyond saving. All they could hope to do now was prevent the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings. A woman rushed toward them, gathering Rebecca in her arms. "My darling girl, I thought I'd lost you." "I'm all right, Mother," Rebecca assured her, though her voice was hoarse from smoke. "Thanks to this man," her mother said, turning tearful eyes to Jackson. "God bless you, sir." Jackson nodded awkwardly, unused to such praise. He was just doing what anyone would do, what anyone should do. He climbed to his feet, swaying slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb from his system. "You're hurt," Rebecca noticed, pointing to a burn on his forearm where his sleeve had caught fire. "It's nothing," he insisted, though now that she mentioned it, the pain was becoming apparent. "Nonsense," Rebecca's mother declared. "You're coming with us. We have a room at the boarding house, and I have salve for that burn." Too exhausted to argue, Jackson followed the two women through the gathering crowd. People patted his back and called him a hero as they passed, making him uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't looking for recognition. He had simply acted on instinct. The boarding house was a two-story structure a few blocks from the saloon. Inside, Rebecca's mother, who introduced herself as Martha Reynolds, sat Jackson at a small table while Rebecca fetched water and clean cloths. "You're new in town," Martha observed as she gently cleaned his wounded arm. "Just arrived today," Jackson confirmed. "Was heading to the saloon for a meal when I heard the commotion." "Well, Mr. Vance, Jackson Vance. Well, Mr. Vance, it seems Providence brought you to Gonzales just when my daughter needed you most." Jackson's eyes drifted to Rebecca, who was pouring a glass of water for him with hands that still trembled slightly. He noticed that beneath the soot and smoke, she was quite beautiful, with chestnut hair and delicate features that reminded him of a porcelain doll his sister had once treasured. "What brings you to Gonzales, Mr. Vance?" Rebecca asked, setting the water before him. "Work," he replied. "I've been hired to help drive a herd north to Kansas, just stopping here to meet up with the trail boss before we head out. When do you leave?" Martha asked, applying a pungent-smelling salve to his burn. "Day after tomorrow, if all goes according to plan." Rebecca felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment. This man had risked his life to save hers, and now he would be gone in 2 days, just another drifting cowboy passing through town. "You must stay for supper tomorrow," Martha insisted. "It's the least we can do to thank you." "That's not necessary, madam. I won't hear of it," Martha said firmly. "Besides, I'm the best cook in Gonzales, if I do say so myself." Jackson smiled for the first time that evening. "Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse?" Rebecca found herself studying his face as he smiled. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and kind eyes the color of warm honey. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his cheeks, and his dark hair curled slightly where it had escaped his hat. "It's settled then," Martha said, finishing her ministrations. "Tomorrow at 6, we live above the dress shop on Main Street." As Jackson stood to leave, he swayed again, and Rebecca quickly moved to steady him. "You should rest," she said, concern evident in her voice. "The smoke can affect you more than you realize." "I'll be fine," he assured her, though in truth he felt lightheaded and exhausted. "Just need some sleep." "Where are you staying?" Martha asked. "Haven't sorted that yet, was planning to ask at the saloon, but—" He shrugged. "There's a room available here," Martha said. "I'll speak to Mrs. Hollister." Before Jackson could protest, Martha had bustled away to find the proprietress of the boarding house. Left alone with Rebecca, he suddenly felt awkward, unsure what to say to this woman whose life he had saved. "Your mother is very kind," he finally offered. "She likes taking care of people," Rebecca replied with a small smile. "But she's right, you need rest, and I'm truly grateful for what you did. Not many men would have run into a burning building for a stranger." Jackson's eyes met hers. "I'm glad I was there." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection neither could quite name. Then Martha returned, announcing that a room was indeed available, and the moment broke. "Good night, Mr. Vance," Rebecca said softly as her mother led her away. "And thank you again." "Good night, Miss Reynolds," he replied, watching as she disappeared up the stairs. Jackson slept fitfully that night, his dreams filled with fire and smoke and a pair of blue eyes that seemed to call to him across a burning room. He woke early, his throat raw and his arm throbbing, but his mind clear. He needed to meet with Ellis Morgan, the trail boss who had hired him, and confirm the details of their journey north. He found Morgan at the livery stable, inspecting horses for the drive. The older man greeted him with a firm handshake. "Heard you had quite the night," Morgan said. "Town's talking about the cowboy who walked through fire." Jackson shook his head. "Just did what needed doing." "Well, it's good to know I hired a man with courage," Morgan replied. "We ride out day after tomorrow at dawn. 20 men, 2,000 head of cattle, and a long way to Abilene." As they discussed the details of the drive, Jackson found his thoughts drifting to Rebecca. He wondered how she was faring after their ordeal, whether she too had dreamed of fire and fear. The drive would take months, and by the time he returned, if he returned to Gonzales at all, she would likely have forgotten him. The excitement of the rescue faded into just another town story. Meanwhile, Rebecca was helping her mother salvage what they could from the ruins of the saloon. The building was a complete loss, just charred timbers and ash, but some items in the back storeroom had survived. Her father's piano was destroyed, which brought tears to her eyes. He had played that instrument every night until his death 2 years ago, and she had taken up the job after him, earning enough to support herself and her mother. "What will we do now?" she asked Martha as they sifted through the debris. "We'll manage," her mother assured her. "We always do. Mr. Gentry already offered me more hours at the dress shop, and you play beautifully enough that you could give lessons." Rebecca nodded, though the thought of teaching piano to the children of Gonzales held little appeal compared to the lively atmosphere of the saloon. She had enjoyed the music, the energy, even the occasional rowdiness of the cowboys and travelers who passed through. "I was thinking about Mr. Vance," she admitted after a moment. "A fine man," Martha agreed. "Don't see his like often these days. He's leaving soon." Martha gave her daughter a knowing look. 2 days isn't soon, my dear. It's time enough." "Time enough for what? To decide if he's worth waiting for." Rebecca blushed. "Mother, I barely know him." "Sometimes," Martha said sagely, "you know enough." That evening, Rebecca took special care with her appearance before heading to the dress shop with her mother. She wore her best dress, a blue calico that matched her eyes, and arranged her hair in a style that softened her features. She told herself it was simply proper respect for a dinner guest, but the flutter in her stomach when a knock came at the door belied her casual reasoning. Jackson stood on the threshold, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, his hat in his hands. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Rebecca, and he swallowed before speaking. "Miss Reynolds," he greeted her. "You look well." "As do you, Mr. Vance," she replied, noting that without the layer of soot and with his face freshly shaved, he was even more handsome than she had realized. "Please come in." The apartment above the dress shop was small but comfortable, with a table set for three and the aroma of Martha's cooking filling the space. Jackson presented Martha with a small bouquet of wildflowers, which made the older woman beam with delight. "How thoughtful." "Rebecca, put these in water." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Martha regaling Jackson with stories of Gonzales and its inhabitants. Rebecca found herself watching him as he listened attentively to her mother, laughing at the right moments and asking questions that showed genuine interest. There was something about him that spoke of decency and integrity, qualities she had found increasingly rare among the men who passed through town. "So, Mr. Vance," Martha said as they finished the apple pie she had baked, "tell us about yourself. Where are you from?" "Originally from Tennessee," he answered. "My family had a small farm there, but after the war there wasn't much left. My father never recovered from his wounds and we lost the land." He shrugged, as if dismissing the hardship. "I headed west like so many others, looking for something new." "And did you find it?" Rebecca asked softly. Jackson's eyes met hers. "Still looking, I suppose." After dinner, Martha insisted on cleaning up alone, practically shooing Rebecca and Jackson onto the small balcony that overlooked Main Street. The evening was mild, with a crescent moon rising in the east and the stars beginning to appear overhead. "How is your arm?" Rebecca asked, nodding toward the bandage visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. "Healing," he assured her. "Your mother's salve worked wonders." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the lamplighter moved down the street, bringing each gas lamp to life. "I never properly thanked you," Rebecca said at last, "for what you did. It was incredibly brave." Jackson shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," she pointed out. "You did. You risked your life for someone you'd never even met." He turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "I've seen too many people stand by when others needed help, during the war, after." He trailed off, then shrugged. "Guess I decided long ago I wouldn't be that kind of man." Rebecca felt drawn to him, to his quiet strength and the sadness that seemed to linger behind his eyes. "What was it like?" she asked. "In the war, hell," he answered simply. "But that's long past now." "Is it?" "You still carry it with you, I can see it." Jackson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're perceptive, Miss Reynolds." "Rebecca," she corrected him. "After what we've been through, I think formalities are unnecessary." "Rebecca," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. "Then you must call me Jackson," she smiled. "I think I will." The next morning, Jackson found himself at loose ends. With preparations for the cattle drive complete and a day to spare before departure, he decided to help with the cleanup efforts at the saloon. Many townspeople had gathered to assist the owner, a stout man named Terrence Coleman, in salvaging what could be saved and clearing away what couldn't. He was lifting a charred beam when he spotted Rebecca approaching, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. His heart gave an unexpected leap at the sight of her, and he silently chided himself for the reaction. He was leaving tomorrow, and there was no sense in developing feelings for a woman he would likely never see again. "Good morning," she greeted him, setting down her basket. "I thought the workers might appreciate some refreshment." She unveiled the basket to reveal biscuits, slices of ham, and a jug of lemonade. The men gathered around gratefully, thanking her as she distributed the food. "This is mighty kind of you, Miss Reynolds," Coleman said, taking a biscuit. "Your father would be proud of how you've stepped up." "I wish he was still here," Rebecca replied, a shadow crossing her face. "He loved this place." "We all did," Coleman sighed. "Not sure I have it in me to rebuild at my age." "You're not rebuilding?" Jackson asked, surprised. Coleman shook his head. "Insurance money will cover my debts, but starting over," he shrugged. "Takes more than money, takes heart, and I'm not sure mine's in it anymore." Rebecca looked stricken. "But the saloon has always been here, since before I was born." "Times change, my dear," Coleman said gently. "Maybe it's time for something new in Gonzales." As the men returned to work, Rebecca stood watching them, her expression troubled. Jackson approached her, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "You all right?" he asked. "I just can't imagine Gonzales without the Silver Dollar," she admitted. "It's where I grew up, where I learned to play piano, where—" She trailed off, then smiled sadly. "Listen to me. There are people who lost everything in the war, and I'm upset about a saloon." "It's your home," Jackson said simply. "It's natural to mourn its loss." She looked at him gratefully. "You understand?" "I do." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you walk with me? I'd like to see more of Gonzales before I leave." Rebecca's smile brightened. "I'd be happy to." They strolled through the town, Rebecca pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of her childhood. Gonzales was a typical Texas town, with a main street lined with businesses, a courthouse square, and residential streets branching outward. But through Rebecca's eyes, it became a place of history and meaning. "That's where my father proposed to my mother," she said, pointing to a large oak tree near the river. "And there," she indicated the courthouse, "is where he played his first concert in Gonzales. He was a classically trained pianist who ended up in a frontier saloon." She laughed. "Life takes strange turns." "It does indeed," Jackson agreed, thinking of his own winding path from Tennessee farm boy to Texas cowboy. They stopped at a small cemetery on the edge of town, where Rebecca led him to a simple headstone. "My father," she explained. "Daniel Reynolds. He died 2 years ago. Heart gave out right in the middle of playing Oh, Susanna. Mother says he would have appreciated the irony." Jackson removed his hat respectfully. "He sounds like a good man." "The best," Rebecca confirmed. "He taught me everything, not just music, but how to see beauty in the world, how to find joy even in difficult times." She traced the letters of her father's name on the stone. "I miss him every day." "I understand that too," Jackson said quietly. "Lost my father 5 years ago." They stood in silence for a moment, sharing the unspoken bond of those who have known grief. Then Rebecca straightened her shoulders and smiled. "Enough sadness for one day," she declared. "There's a spot by the river where the wildflowers are blooming. Would you like to see it?" The spot turned out to be a gentle bend in the Guadalupe River, where a grassy bank was indeed carpeted with bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush. They sat beneath the shade of a cypress tree, watching the water flow past. "Will you come back?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "After the cattle drive," Jackson hesitated. "I don't know. Depends on what work I find up north. But if you could." He looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. "I'd like to," he admitted. "Very much," she smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes and made his heart skip a beat. "Then I'll hope for it." They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives and dreams. Jackson told her about his childhood in Tennessee, about the devastation of the war, and about his wandering years since. Rebecca spoke of her love for music, her desire to see more of the world beyond Gonzales, and her conflicted feelings about the role of a woman in their society. "Sometimes I envy you," she confessed. "The freedom to go where you please, to make your own way without having to consider what's proper for a lady." "It's not all it's cracked up to be," Jackson replied. "Freedom can be lonely." As the sun began to set, they reluctantly made their way back to town. Neither wanted the day to end, aware that tomorrow would bring their separation. "Will you write?" Rebecca asked as they neared the dress shop, "if you'd like me to." "I would." She hesitated, then added, "I've enjoyed today, Jackson, more than I can say." He took her hand, a bold move that surprised them both. "So have I." For a moment they stood there, hands linked, neither willing to break the connection. Then Martha appeared at the shop door, calling Rebecca in for supper, and the spell was broken. "Until tomorrow," Rebecca said softly, slipping her hand from his. "Until tomorrow," he echoed, watching as she disappeared inside. That night, Jackson lay awake, his mind full of Rebecca, her smile, her laugh, the way she listened so intently when he spoke, as if his words truly mattered to her. He had known her barely 2 days, yet he felt a connection unlike any he had experienced before. But tomorrow he would ride out with the herd, and who knew when or if he would return to Gonzales. Morning came too soon, the eastern sky barely lightening as Jackson made his way to the cattle pens on the outskirts of town. The herd was already moving, cowboys guiding the first wave of longhorns onto the trail north. Ellis Morgan nodded in greeting as Jackson mounted his horse. "Right on time, Vance. We're moving out." Jackson scanned the town, hoping for a glimpse of Rebecca, but the streets were empty at this early hour. Of course she wouldn't come. It had been a brief connection, nothing more, a moment of gratitude for a rescue, extended into a pleasant day of conversation. He was a fool to expect anything else. He turned his horse toward the trail, falling in line with the other cowboys. The dust kicked up by thousands of hooves already filled the air, and the familiar sounds of cattle lowing and men calling to each other surrounded him. This was his life now, the open trail, the endless sky, the freedom Rebecca had envied. So why did it suddenly feel so empty? Jackson. The voice cut through the noise of the herd, and he reined in his horse, turning to see Rebecca running toward the trail, her skirts gathered in her hands and her hair flying loose around her shoulders. "Rebecca!" He guided his horse back toward her, ignoring Morgan's impatient shout. She reached him, breathless, her cheeks flushed with exertion. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye," she gasped. He dismounted, standing before her with his hat in his hands. I know," she interrupted. "I nearly didn't come. It seems foolish, doesn't it? We've known each other such a short time." "Not foolish," he said softly. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small object, pressing it into his palm. It was a locket, silver and worn with age. "It was my mother's," she explained. "Something to remember me by, and—" She hesitated, then continued in a rush, "and a reason to return it to me." Jackson closed his fingers around the locket, deeply moved by the gesture. "Rebecca, Vance," Morgan's voice cut through the moment. "We're moving out, now." Jackson glanced over his shoulder at the departing herd, then back at Rebecca. "I have to go, I know," she smiled, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Go safely, Jackson Vance, and come back if you can." Before he could think better of it, he leaned forward and kissed her. A brief, tender meeting of lips that ended almost as soon as it began. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, the silver locket clutched tightly in his hand, the memory of her lips on his more precious than any keepsake. The first week on the trail passed in a blur of dust, heat, and exhaustion. The routine was grueling but familiar up before dawn, long days in the saddle, nights spent taking turns watching the herd. Jackson threw himself into the work, hoping physical fatigue would quiet his thoughts of Rebecca. But her face haunted his dreams, and during the long, monotonous hours of riding, his mind constantly returned to their brief time together. At night, by the light of the campfire, he composed letters to her in his head, describing the trail, the endless Texas landscape, the characters among his fellow cowboys. When they reached a town with a post office, he committed one such letter to paper and sent it off to Gonzales, wondering if it would reach her, if she would reply, if she thought of him as often as he thought of her. The drive continued northward, crossing into Indian territory with its increased dangers and challenges. The men grew tense, alert for signs of trouble, but the first real crisis came not from hostile tribes but from nature itself. A violent storm descended on them without warning, the sky turning an ominous green-black before unleashing torrential rain, hail, and lightning that spooked the herd. The cattle stampeded in terror, and the cowboys raced to contain them, riding through sheets of blinding rain as thunder crashed overhead. Jackson found himself separated from the others, pursuing a group of cattle that had broken away toward a ravine. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brilliant flashes, revealing the danger just in time. The ravine dropped off steeply, and the cattle were heading straight for it. He spurred his horse forward, cutting in front of the lead steer and forcing it to turn. His horse slipped in the mud, nearly going down, but recovered just in time to avoid the plunging hooves of the cattle. Jackson guided them back toward the main herd, rain stinging his face and soaking him to the skin. As he rode, a flash of lightning struck a nearby tree, the crack of thunder coming simultaneously with the impact. His horse reared in terror, throwing Jackson from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, and for a terrifying moment, he thought the panicked cattle would trample him. But his faithful mount stood its ground between him and the herd, and the cattle flowed around them like a river diverted by a boulder. Jackson struggled to his feet, grabbing the reins and soothing the trembling horse. "Good boy," he murmured, running a hand down the animal's neck. "You saved my life." By the time he rejoined the other cowboys, the storm had passed and the herd had been contained, though several cattle had been lost to the ravine and others injured in the chaos. Morgan took stock of the men, relieved to find all present and mostly unharmed. "That was a close one," the trail boss said, eyeing Jackson's mud-covered form. "You all right, Vance?" "Been better," Jackson admitted, wincing at the pain in his ribs where he'd hit the ground. "But I'll live." "Good," Morgan nodded, "because we've got a long way to go yet." That night, as Jackson sat by the fire nursing his bruised ribs, he pulled out Rebecca's locket. He hadn't opened it before, respecting her privacy, but now he carefully pried apart the silver halves. Inside was a miniature portrait of a younger Rebecca beside a man who must have been her father, both smiling, her resemblance to him unmistakable in the shape of their eyes and the curve of their smiles. Jackson stared at the tiny image, feeling as if he'd been given a precious glimpse into her life. She had entrusted him with this memory, this piece of her heart. It was a responsibility he took seriously, a trust he would not betray. "Pretty girl," commented Frank Willis, one of the older cowboys who had settled beside Jackson with a cup of coffee. "Yours?" "No," Jackson replied, closing the locket and returning it to his pocket. "Just someone I'm returning this to." Willis gave him a knowing look. "Must be someone to have you mooning over her picture every night." Jackson hadn't realized his nightly ritual of checking the locket had been so obvious. "It's complicated," he said. "Ain't it always?" Willis chuckled. "Love's the most complicated business there is, son. More than cattle, more than cards, more than anything else in this world." "I didn't say anything about love," Jackson protested. Willis just smiled and sipped his coffee. "Didn't have to." Meanwhile, back in Gonzales, Rebecca was facing challenges of her own. Without the saloon, she had indeed begun giving piano lessons, using the instrument in the town church. The income was steady but smaller than what she had earned at the Silver Dollar, and she found herself missing the lively atmosphere and diverse patrons of the saloon. She had received Jackson's letter, reading it so many times that the paper became soft at the creases. His descriptions of life on the trail were vivid and often humorous, painting a picture of a world so different from her own. She kept the letter in her bedside table, taking it out each night before sleep, imagining his voice speaking the words he had written. "You're pining," Martha observed one evening as Rebecca sat by the window, gazing at the road that led north out of town. "I'm not pining," Rebecca argued. "I'm contemplating." "Contemplating what, pray tell?" Rebecca sighed. "My future, I suppose. With the saloon gone and Mr. Coleman not rebuilding, I feel adrift." Martha sat beside her daughter, taking her hands. "Is this about your music or about a certain cowboy?" "Both," Rebecca admitted. "I can't stop thinking about him, Mother. Is that foolish? We knew each other so briefly." "The heart knows what it knows," Martha said wisely. "Your father proposed to me after knowing me just 3 weeks. Some called us hasty, but we had 50 wonderful years together. But Jackson is gone, perhaps for good. He may never come back to Gonzales." "Then perhaps Gonzales is not where you're meant to be." Rebecca looked at her mother in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, my darling girl, that sometimes love requires courage, the courage to leave what's familiar and safe, to take a chance on something new." Martha smiled. "You've always dreamed of seeing more of the world. Maybe this is your opportunity." "You're suggesting I go after him? A man I barely know, traveling alone across dangerous territory. Mother, that's scandalous." "I'm suggesting you consider what truly matters to you," Martha corrected. "And if that's Jackson Vance, then yes, perhaps you should find a way to follow your heart. Properly chaperoned, of course," she added with a twinkle in her eye. The idea took root in Rebecca's mind, growing stronger with each passing day. When a letter arrived from Terence Coleman announcing his decision to sell the land where the saloon had stood, an idea began to form a way to secure her future, while perhaps finding a path to Jackson. She approached Coleman with a proposition. She would buy the land with her modest savings, combined with a loan from the bank, and build not another saloon but a restaurant and music hall, a place where families could gather alongside the cowboys and travelers who had frequented the Silver Dollar. "It's a risk," Coleman warned her. "Businesses fail all the time, especially those run by women." "I know," Rebecca acknowledged, "but I've been managing the books for the saloon since my father died. I understand the business side as well as the entertainment." Coleman studied her, seeing not the little girl who had grown up playing beneath the saloon's piano, but a determined young woman with a vision. "Your father would be proud," he said at last. "And I believe in you. The land is yours if you want it." The deal was struck, and Rebecca threw herself into planning her new venture. She hired carpenters, ordered supplies, and designed a space that would honor the memory of the Silver Dollar while creating something uniquely her own. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, giving her purpose during the long weeks of waiting for news from Jackson. His letters came sporadically, each one a treasure she savored. He wrote of the challenges of the trail, the beauty of the landscapes they traversed, and increasingly, his longing to see her again. Each letter ended with a promise that when the drive was complete, he would return to Gonzales if she wished it. Her replies were equally heartfelt, sharing her plans for the music hall, her daily life in Gonzales, and her growing feelings for him. She told him of her mother's support, of the community's mixed reaction to her business venture, and of her dreams for the future, dreams that increasingly included him. Summer turned to early autumn, and construction on Rebecca's music hall was well underway when disaster struck again. A dispute between the carpenters and a local supplier escalated into a fistfight, during which a lantern was knocked over, igniting freshly cut lumber and sawdust. The blaze was quickly contained, but not before it had consumed much of the new framework and materials. Rebecca stood among the charred remains, fighting back tears of frustration and despair. The setback would cost her nearly all her remaining funds, potentially derailing the entire project. "Maybe it's a sign," suggested Thomas Green, the banker who had extended her loan. "Perhaps this kind of business isn't meant for a lady like yourself." "With respect, Mr. Green," Rebecca replied, straightening her shoulders, "I don't believe in such signs. This is a setback, not an ending." But privately, she worried. Her savings were depleted, and the bank was unlikely to extend additional credit. She might be forced to sell the land after all, abandoning her dream before it had truly begun. That evening, as she sat at her small desk writing a letter to Jackson about the fire, there was a knock at the door. Martha answered it, then called for Rebecca with an odd note in her voice. Rebecca came to the door to find Ellis Morgan, the trail boss who had hired Jackson, standing on their threshold, hat in hand. "Miss Reynolds?" he asked, his weathered face grave, Rebecca's heart seized with fear. "Yes," she whispered, bracing herself for terrible news. "Is Jackson?" "He's alive," Morgan assured her quickly. "But there was an incident. Apache raiding party hit us near the Red River. Vance took an arrow in the shoulder defending the herd." Rebecca's knees weakened, and she gripped the doorframe for support. "How badly is he hurt?" "Bad enough that he couldn't continue the drive," Morgan explained. "We left him at a doctor's in a settlement called Burntwood. He asked me to bring you this when we passed back through Gonzales." He handed her a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was her locket and a note in Jackson's unsteady hand. "I'm sorry I couldn't return this in person. Think of me kindly. J.V." "When did this happen?" Rebecca demanded, her mind racing. "Nearly 3 weeks ago," Morgan replied. "He was fevered when I left him, but the doctor seemed confident he'd pull through." 3 weeks. If Jackson had survived his wound and the fever, he would be recovering now, perhaps even well enough to travel. But Burntwood was hundreds of miles away, across dangerous territory. "Thank you for bringing this," she said to Morgan, her decision already made. "And for the information." After Morgan had gone, Rebecca turned to her mother, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "I'm going to him," she announced. Martha nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might, but how?" "It's not safe for a woman to travel alone, and we can't afford to hire guards." "The stage runs to Dallas," Rebecca said, thinking aloud. "From there I could find transport north." She hesitated, then added, "But I'll need money." "Your music hall fund." Rebecca nodded, a pang of regret twisting her heart. "It seems I have to choose my dream or my heart." Martha took her daughter's hands. "Perhaps you don't have to choose. The land still has value. We could mortgage it, use the money for your journey, and if all goes well, rebuild later." "And if it doesn't go well, then at least you'll know you tried," Martha said simply. "Better that than a lifetime of wondering what if." The preparations were made quickly. The land was mortgaged, providing enough money for the journey and a small reserve. Martha insisted on accompanying her daughter, refusing to let Rebecca face the dangers of the frontier alone. They packed lightly, taking only what was necessary for travel and for tending to an injured man. The stage journey to Dallas was uncomfortable but uneventful, the coach crowded with travelers of all descriptions. From Dallas, they secured passage with a merchant train heading north toward Indian Territory, where Burntwood lay just south of the Red River. The merchant train moved slowly, the wagons heavy with goods bound for frontier settlements. Rebecca chafed at the delay, imagining Jackson alone and injured, perhaps believing she had received his note and chosen not to come. But there was no faster way to reach him, short of riding out alone, an option Martha firmly vetoed. "He's waited this long," her mother reminded her. "He can wait a few days more." The journey was eye-opening for Rebecca, who had rarely ventured beyond Gonzales. The vastness of Texas stretched in all directions, the landscape changing subtly as they moved northward. At night, gathered around campfires with the merchants and their guards, she heard stories of life on the frontier, tales of hardship and triumph, of communities forged in adversity, of the constant balance between civilization and wilderness. She thought of Jackson traveling this same route with his herd, facing these same challenges and more. Her respect for him deepened, along with her determination to reach him. On the 10th day of their journey, they crested a hill to see Burntwood spread before them, a small settlement of perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a central street, with corrals and scattered homesteads visible beyond the town proper. Rebecca's heart pounded as they approached. Was Jackson still here? Had he recovered? Would he be happy to see her, or had he already moved on, both physically and emotionally? The merchant train rolled into town, and Rebecca and Martha disembarked, thanking the leader for his protection during their journey. A helpful local directed them to the doctor's residence, a modest clapboard house at the edge of town with a sign reading Dr. James Harlow, physician and surgeon. Rebecca hesitated at the gate, suddenly unsure. What if Jackson had died of his wounds after all, and Morgan's optimism had been misplaced? What if he had recovered but left town already? What if— "Go on," Martha urged gently. "You've come all this way, don't falter now." Drawing a deep breath, Rebecca pushed open the gate and approached the door. Her knock was answered by a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a beard streaked with gray. "Dr. Harlow?" she asked. "Yes, madam. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for Jackson Vance. I was told he was brought here with an arrow wound about a month ago." Dr. Harlow's expression softened. "Ah, the young cowboy. Yes, he was here. Nasty wound that the arrow had to be pushed through rather than pulled out, and infection set in afterward." He studied Rebecca's face. "You must be Rebecca," her breath caught. "He mentioned me." "Mentioned you?" Dr. Harlow chuckled. "Called for you in his fever and spoke of you constantly during his recovery. Said you were the reason he had to get well, that he had a locket to return. Then he's alive. He's recovered." Rebecca asked urgently. "He left here about a week ago," Dr. Harlow replied. "Said he had to get back to Gonzales to you. Didn't want to wait until he was fully healed. Stubborn young man. I tried to convince him to rest longer, but—" He shrugged. "When a man's in love, he doesn't always listen to reason." Rebecca's heart sank. "We must have passed each other on the road." "Not likely," Dr. Harlow said. "He was heading southwest, said he knew a shorter route than the main road, something about following a river most of the way." "Then we've come all this way for nothing," Martha sighed. "Not for nothing," Rebecca disagreed. "We know he's alive, that he's coming to Gonzales." She turned back to the doctor. "How was his condition when he left? Will he be able to make the journey safely?" "His wound was healing well, though he'll have some stiffness in that shoulder for months to come. The fever had broken completely." Dr. Harlow smiled reassuringly. "He's young and strong. Barring any unexpected trouble, he should reach Gonzales safely." Rebecca thanked the doctor for his information and care of Jackson. Then she and Martha found lodging at the town's small hotel. They would rest for a day or two before beginning the return journey, following the same route they had taken north. That night, lying in the narrow hotel bed, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking of Jackson somewhere on the trail between Burntwood and Gonzales, perhaps camping beneath the same stars she could see through her window. Had they truly missed each other, ships passing in the night? Or was there still a chance their paths might cross? The next morning, She and Martha were eating breakfast in the hotel's small dining room when a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices, the sound of running feet, and then someone burst through the door, a young boy of perhaps 12, breathless with excitement. "Indian attack," he gasped to the room at large. "On the South Trail. A man rode in just now, said a small group of travelers was ambushed about 10 miles out." The room erupted in questions and exclamations. How many Indians? How many travelers? Were there survivors? "Don't know much," the boy continued. "But the man who reported it said one of the travelers was fighting them off when he rode for help, a cowboy with his arm in a sling." Rebecca was on her feet before the boy finished speaking, her breakfast forgotten. "Jackson," she whispered, her face pale. "The town marshal was organizing a rescue party, calling for volunteers to ride out to the site of the attack." Rebecca rushed outside, pushing through the gathering crowd until she reached him. "Marshal," she called, "please, I need to come with you. The man with the wounded arm, he's coming to find me." The marshal, a grizzled veteran with hard eyes, looked her up and down. "No place for a woman, miss." "We don't know what we'll find out there." "I'm a healer," Martha interjected, joining her daughter. "And my daughter has nursing experience. If there are wounded, you'll need our help." The marshal hesitated, then nodded curtly. "We leave in 10 minutes. If you can find horses and keep up, you can come. But stay behind the men and do exactly as I say." They scrambled to secure mounts, borrowing horses from the livery with promises of generous payment upon their return. Rebecca had ridden since childhood, but Martha was less experienced, and Rebecca worried about her mother's ability to keep pace with the rescue party. But Martha waved away her concerns. "I won't slow you down," she promised. "Not when Jackson needs us." The rescue party rode out at a gallop, 14 men armed with rifles and pistols, followed by Rebecca and Martha. The pace was punishing, the horses' hooves throwing up clouds of dust as they thundered down the trail. Rebecca's heart pounded in time with her mount's strides, fear and hope warring within her. About 8 miles south of Burntwood, they came upon the first sign of trouble, an abandoned wagon beside the trail. Its contents scattered, but the oxen still in their traces, grazing peacefully. There were no bodies, no blood, nothing to indicate what had happened to the wagon's owners. "Strange," the marshal muttered, signaling for the party to slow. "Keep alert, men. This doesn't feel right." They proceeded more cautiously, rifles ready. A mile further, they heard gunfire, the distinctive crack of a revolver, followed by the deeper boom of what sounded like a buffalo gun. "There!" someone shouted, pointing to a plume of smoke rising from a copse of trees near the river. They spurred their horses forward, and as they approached, the scene came into view. A small camp had been established by the river, with 3 wagons drawn into a defensive circle. Inside this makeshift fortress, several figures were visible: men, women, and children, some firing at attackers who darted in and out of the surrounding trees. And there, standing atop one of the wagons with a rifle in his good hand, was Jackson. Rebecca's heart leaped at the sight of him, alive and fighting. His left arm was indeed in a sling, but his right was steady as he tracked an attacker through his rifle sights and fired. The shot found its mark, and a warrior fell from his horse with a cry. The rescue party split into 2 groups, circling the attackers from both sides. Caught between the defenders in the wagon circle and the newly arrived townsmen, the raiders quickly reassessed their situation. Their leader called out in his native language, and the warriors withdrew, disappearing into the trees as quickly as they had appeared. The marshal held his men back, wary of pursuit that might lead into an ambush. "Hold position," he ordered. "Make sure they're really gone." After a tense few minutes with no further sign of the attackers, The rescue party approached the wagon circle. The travelers, a group of 3 families heading south to settle near San Antonio, greeted them with relief and gratitude. Rebecca dismounted, her eyes searching for Jackson. He had climbed down from the wagon and was speaking with one of the family patriarchs, his back to her. Even from behind, she could see that he was thinner than when she had last seen him, his shirt hanging loose on his frame. "Jackson," she called, her voice catching with emotion. He turned, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw her. For a moment he stood frozen, as if afraid she might be a mirage that would vanish if he moved too suddenly. Then he was striding toward her, his face breaking into a smile that made her heart soar. "Rebecca," he said incredulously. "Why Morgan brought your note," she explained, closing the distance between them. "I couldn't just wait in Gonzales, not knowing if you were all right." He reached her, stopping just short of touching her, his eyes drinking in every detail of her face. "You came all this way for me." "For you," she confirmed, smiling through tears that had sprung unbidden to her eyes. "Always for you." With his good arm, he pulled her to him, holding her as if he might never let go. "I thought I'd never see you again," he murmured into her hair. "When that arrow hit me, all I could think was that I'd never get to tell you." She pulled back slightly to look up at him. "Tell me what?" "That I love you," he said simply. "That from the moment I walked into that burning saloon, something changed in me. I've been wandering for years, Rebecca, never feeling like I belonged anywhere. But with you, I feel like I've found home." She touched his face gently, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I love you too," she whispered. "Enough to leave everything behind and follow you across Texas." He kissed her then, heedless of the onlookers, a kiss that spoke of longing fulfilled and promises kept. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "Your arm?" she asked, gently touching his sling. "Healing," he assured her. "Dr. Harlow patched me up well. It'll be stiff for a while, but I'll have full use of it eventually." He glanced over her shoulder, noticing Martha for the first time. "You brought your mother. Did you think I'd let her chase after a cowboy unchaperoned?" Martha asked, approaching with a warm smile. "Besides, someone had to make sure she didn't break her neck riding like a madwoman to reach you." Jackson's laugh was a beautiful sound to Rebecca's ears. "Madam, I'm grateful to you for coming, and for raising a daughter stubborn enough to cross Texas for a man she barely knows." "Oh, I think she knows you well enough," Martha replied with a twinkle in her eye. "Some souls recognize each other instantly. My Daniel and I were like that." The marshal approached, interrupting their reunion. "Hate to break this up, but we need to get these folks back to Burntwood before those raiders decide to return with reinforcements." The journey back to town was slower, with the wounded to care for and the wagons to protect. Rebecca rode beside Jackson, their horses close enough that their legs occasionally brushed, each contact a reassurance that the other was real and present. He told her of his time with Dr. Harlow, of his determination to reach Gonzales even before he was fully healed, and of how he had encountered the 3 families on the trail and joined their party for mutual protection. She shared the story of the saloon land, her plans for the music hall, and the fire that had threatened to end her dream before it began. "So you mortgaged the land to come find me?" he asked, his expression troubled. "Rebecca, you shouldn't have risked your future that way." "It wasn't a risk," she replied confidently. "It was an investment in what matters most." His smile returned, tender and full of wonder. "When we get back to Gonzales, we'll rebuild that music hall together. I know a bit about construction, and I've saved most of my earnings from the last few years of driving cattle. You do that. Stay in Gonzales." "I'd go anywhere with you," he said simply. "But Gonzales seems like a fine place to put down roots." They reached Burntwood by mid-afternoon, the town turning out to welcome the rescue party and aid the wounded. Dr. Harlow was not pleased to see his former patient return so soon, especially after engaging in a firefight. "I told you to rest that arm," he scolded Jackson as he examined the wound for any new damage. "I did rest it," Jackson protested. "Mostly." "Holding a rifle and shooting raiders is not resting," Dr. Harlow retorted, but there was no real anger in his tone. "However, you're a lucky man. The wound hasn't reopened, though you've probably set your recovery back a week or two." "Worth it," Jackson said, his eyes finding Rebecca across the room, where she was helping tend to a child with a minor cut. "Definitely worth it." They remained in Burntwood for 3 days, allowing Jackson to regain some strength and the rescued families to recover from their ordeal. On the morning of the 4th day, they set out for Gonzales, joining a larger wagon train for safety. The journey would be slow but secure, with enough armed men to discourage further attacks. As they traveled, Jackson and Rebecca had ample time to talk, to learn each other's stories more deeply, to confirm what both already knew in their hearts, that their meeting in the burning saloon had been the beginning of something rare and precious. "I've been thinking," Jackson said one evening as they sat by the campfire, the wagon train settled for the night. "When we get back to Gonzales, before we start rebuilding the music hall, I'd like to build something else first." "Oh," Rebecca asked, curious. "What's that?" He took her hand, his expression serious. "A life together. Rebecca Reynolds, will you marry me?" Though she had suspected where the conversation was heading, the actual words still took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered, joy filling her heart. "Yes, Jackson Vance, I will marry you." He kissed her, sealing the promise between them, then drew back with a smile. "I don't have a ring yet, but I don't need a ring," she assured him. "Just you safe and whole." Martha, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop from her seat nearby, abandoned the pretense and embraced them both. "Your father would have approved," she told Rebecca, tears shining in her eyes. "He always said you'd know your own heart when the time came." The wagon train reached Gonzales in early November, arriving on a crisp, clear morning when the town was just beginning to stir. Rebecca felt a surge of emotion as they crested the final hill and saw the familiar building spread before them, home, with all its memories and connections, but now seen through new eyes, with new possibilities. They were married 2 weeks later in the town church, with Martha beaming proudly in the front pew, and what seemed like the entire population of Gonzales in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that Martha had lovingly sewn, and Jackson wore a new suit that made him look startlingly different from the dusty cowboy who had walked through flames to find her. "You clean up nicely," she teased him as they danced at their wedding celebration. "Don't get used to it," he warned with a grin. "Once we start building, it'll be back to work clothes." True to his word, Jackson threw himself into the construction of the music hall as soon as their brief honeymoon 3 days at a small cabin by the Guadalupe River was over. With his savings combined with what remained of Rebecca's funds after repaying the mortgage, they had enough to build a sturdy, attractive building on the site of the old saloon. Jackson hired the best carpenters in the area and worked alongside them, his injured arm growing stronger with each passing day. Rebecca was often there too, suggesting changes to the design, bringing food to the workers, and occasionally picking up a hammer herself when an extra hand was needed. By spring, the Vance Music Hall was ready for its grand opening. It was a beautiful structure, with large windows to let in light, a spacious dance floor, and a raised stage where Rebecca's new piano, a wedding gift from the townspeople, held pride of place. Tables surrounded the dance floor, and a long bar along one wall served food and drinks to patrons of all ages. The opening night was a triumph, with every seat filled and people standing along the walls. Rebecca played her father's favorite songs, her fingers flying over the keys with joy and confidence. Jackson moved among the guests, ensuring everyone was comfortable and happy, occasionally stopping to watch his wife with undisguised admiration. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and they were alone in their new establishment, Jackson pulled Rebecca into a dance, humming softly as they swayed together in the dim light. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Completely," she assured him. "Everything I dreamed of and more." "The music hall is beautiful," he agreed. "You've created something special here." "Not the music hall," she corrected, looking up at him with love shining in her eyes. "This, us, our life together." She hesitated, then added with a smile, "and the family we're going to build." He stopped dancing, his eyes widening as her meaning registered. "Rebecca, are you saying?" She nodded, laughing at his expression of stunned delight. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. In about 7 months, there will be 3 of us." Jackson lifted her off her feet, spinning her around with a whoop of joy before remembering her condition and setting her gently back down. "A baby," he breathed, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "The first of several, I hope," Rebecca said, covering his hand with her own. "As many as you want," he promised. "I love you, Rebecca Vance, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "My brave cowboy who walked through fire to find me." In the years that followed, Gonzales grew and prospered, and with it, the Vance family. Their first child, a son they named Daniel after Rebecca's father, was born strong and healthy in the winter of 1876. He was followed 2 years later by twin girls, Elizabeth and Sarah, and in 1882 by another son, Michael. The music hall thrived under their joint management, becoming the heart of Gonzales's social life. Rebecca continued to play, teaching her children as they grew old enough to reach the keys, while Jackson expanded the business, eventually adding rooms for travelers upstairs and a small theater for touring productions. On the 5th anniversary of the fire that had brought them together, Jackson presented Rebecca with a gift, a framed newspaper clipping, yellowed with age, describing the burning of the Silver Dollar Saloon and the brave cowboy who had walked through flames to rescue a young woman trapped inside. "To remind us where we began," he said as she read it, her eyes misting with memories. "As if I could ever forget," she replied, touching his face gently. The years of outdoor work had weathered his features, adding lines around his eyes and mouth, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. "That was the night my life truly started." "Mine too," he agreed, drawing her into his arms. "The moment I heard your voice through the smoke, I was lost and found all at once." They stood together by the window of their home, watching as their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the spring breeze. The town stretched beyond, peaceful and familiar, the place where their love had been forged in fire and had grown stronger with each passing day. "No regrets?" Jackson asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it anyway. Rebecca smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with the love and life they had built together. "Not one," she said softly. "Every step of our journey, every challenge we've faced, it was all worth it to be here, now with you." He kissed her then, a kiss that held the memory of that first desperate meeting in the burning saloon, the joy of their reunion on the trail, the promise of their wedding day, and the deep, abiding love that had only grown richer and more profound with time. Outside, their children called for them to come join their game, and hand in hand, Jackson and Rebecca stepped out into the sunshine, Into the future, they continued to build together a future born in flames but flourishing in the fertile soil of love, courage, and the unshakable bond between two souls who had recognized each other instantly. Against all odds, in the heart of a burning room,